So, hello and welcome, Ankush. How are you?
I'm doing good, buddy. Yeah, sweltering hot today.
Yeah,
But yeah, I'm doing good.
yeah. So, if there's any drips of sweats dropping from our foreheads, it's not because we're nervous; it's because we're extremely hot. So, I guess the best place to start really is you're a coach, but you coach through a very particular understanding called the principles, or the three principles, or the three Ps, whatever people call it these days. So how did you arrive at that point? Because I haven't, haven't read your book and know a little bit about your story. Your journey wasn't always about coaching, wasn't always about this understanding. Like, what was your life a little bit like before that?
Yeah, I guess my personal development journey started when I was like properly when I was 19. And I started just looking into kind of personal development stuff to just be a bit more confident. Because I really wasn't, growing up, I was the shy kid. I was really insecure. I'd been bullied a bit, nothing too bad, but like, I'd gone through all of that. And As I got older and started paying more attention to members of the opposite sex, I kind of realized, oh, maybe I need to be a bit more confident. Maybe I need to be a bit more secure in myself. And so that's kind of where my personal development journey started. And it was literally, the first big shift for me was, oh, I can make eye contact with people, because that was like super scary for me. Like I used to walk through the world staring at my feet because I
Mm,
was so scared to even just look at the world. And I'm not talking intense eye contact. I mean, just looking at people, I was so insecure. And so throughout my 20s, I kind of got more and more into personal development, and I would listen to audiobooks in my car, everything from Buddhism and Eckhart Tolle to, kind of how to win friends and influence people,
mm,
either audiobooks or reading books. Um, watching videos. I joked that in my 20s it was my only real hobby, was personal development. And I even went so far as to have speech lessons, elocution lessons for a year. I did Alexander technique, which is
mhm.
normally people who do horse riding, or actors for your posture. Went to the gym a bit. Anything I could do to improve myself, I did. And it seemed to have a really big difference. People
Mhm.
would notice, friends of mine, like who hadn't seen me for a few years since uni, would be, wow, you're really different. There's something shifted about you.
Mm,
And yet, whilst that's true on one level, on another level, like deep, deep, deep inside, I still felt like the same insecure kid when I started that journey. And this manifested, like everywhere in my life, but really it manifested in my relationships. And I would pretty much constantly like get dumped. you know um and my friends were like, they didn't understand it. One of my friends went, I don't get it, you're a catch. It was a guy, and and he was like, I don't get it. He goes, I fool around, I mess around, and I can understand why women wouldn't want to be with me, but they do. And he's like, but you're a nice guy, you got a good job, you got all the things that women are looking for. You don't mind getting into a serious relationship. What's going on? And I hated that question and statement, because I was like, I've been into this personal development thing for 10 years, and I still haven't figured this. Like, there's something wrong with me. Like, I don't know what it is. And so I kind of kept on going in that personal development world, kept on having a couple more insights. But about a year after he said that, I had some kind of epiphany or realization, randomly out of the blue. Not when I was coaching, not when I was reading, and just completely out of the blue, where I kind of just did this thought experiment around women. And I was like, if I if happiness, like, you hear all these things, happiness comes from the inside, only you
mhm.
can make you happy. And I just went, well, hold on a second. If that's really true, if I never got married, could I be happy? And I know for a lot of people listening probably think, of course, but for me it didn't look like that. And when I followed the logic through, I went, oh God, that's really true. Yeah, it could be like, it has to work that way. And then I went, well, what if I never had a girlfriend? What if I never got into a relationship where I've had no kind of female connection ever again? And I was like, God, that has to be true. Like, if my happiness is really coming from inside me, then that has to follow through. Right. And so, kind of, that really is in alignment with what the three principles are, but I didn't know that. And it was then 6 months later when I read a book which kind of explained it in a much more clearer way what the insider had, like everything is inside out. And I still didn't know what the three principles were, right? But I was starting to shift, and it was almost like I was being pulled down this trajectory. And a year after that epiphany, I had another epiphany. And I've been trying to work out like what my purpose was, what my passion was, what did I want to do with my life? And I couldn't come up with an answer. I'd been thinking about this for 2 years. And then one day I said, I'm gonna figure this out. I'm gonna spend all weekend thinking about this. And all I did was get myself in circles. And it was after the weekend when I stopped thinking about it and I got home from work and I was cooking, I had another epiphany, and it was like, you should be a coach. And it made complete sense because at that stage, I'd been in personal development for over 11 years. And it was my only hobby. I loved doing it. And I was like, oh, yeah, why didn't I think of that before? And 10 days later, I'm signed up for a coach training program with a guy called Jamie Smart. And that was his draft book. He didn't release it as that, but that was the book that I'd read 6 months earlier. And so I'd kind of gotten to more connection with him, signed up for this coach training. But little did I know that the coach training, whilst it was a coach training, was really founded on this thing called the three principles, right? And I talk about, there was my life where there was Ankush up until that point, and then there was Ankush after that point. That's how big an impact it had on my life.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah. That, and do you know what? There's so much in that really, and I feel like I say this all the time, but resonates with my journey. Like the whole, recognizing that happiness does come within, and I almost had the same question as you. Well, what if I never got married? What if I never have a girlfriend? Like, would I be happy? And I actually went through, and people who listen to the podcast know this anyway, like 7 years of being single before I met my girlfriend, who I'm currently with and still with. And that was as much my choice rather than, a bit of, insecurity and, bad luck around women or whatever, whatever it normally looks like to us, right? And it was a lot of like, well, can I be happy on my own? And there were so many things that I did, and again, personal development stuff, and there was just a whole host of it. And the thing that really unlocked the door for me was the first time I went traveling solo, because I'd always, like, I enjoy traveling, and I've been traveling a few times, and I'd always felt like even when I go to places like a party or an event, I always feel like I like to have someone there so that I could fall back on. And I felt like I wouldn't be able to enjoy myself if I didn't have like something familiar. And when I went traveling solo, it was like, well, now you don't have anyone. You've only got yourself. You've only got your own choices, your own decisions, your own happiness. Yes, you're going to meet people on the way. And that was the kind of final piece of the puzzle that fell into place for me, of like, okay, now I really understand. Because it's one thing, saying it, happiness comes from within, and trying to live in that way, but actually living it was like the most powerful thing. Like realizing, actually, I don't need to be around anyone in particular to be happy. I am happy. Like, and that was the real big piece. And whilst all that, I'd already, discovered the principles through a mentor of mine, John Dashfield. And yeah, just, I was, things were starting to, it was like, yeah, just the door just opened, and it was like, that epiphany moment, like you said a little bit. So what was it about this particular coaching course with Jamie that kind of helped you to understand, I guess, the principles? And maybe this is a good time to explain what they are, because people are probably going, what are these principles you keep mentioning?
Yeah, so I didn't really understand the principles at the beginning. This is the thing. Like, people go, well, what are the principles? And they try and understand them. So I'll kind of briefly say, The three principles are the three principles of mind, thought, and consciousness. And it's a description of how our reality is created, right? But now I'm going to say, just throw all that out the window. Don't worry about it. It's not important. It took me a long time to kind of get my head around that. And this is what's cool about this work, is that even though you don't, like, you'll never, I still don't understand it fully, right? Like, it's a journey, but it started having an impact on me. And maybe if I share some of my insights, I think that will be probably more helpful to your audience. So the first weekend I'm on this training, and there's an external speaker there, and they're coming in, and it was a 3-day training. And at the beginning I was like, what is this nonsense? I didn't get it. And I was very judgmental of the people that were there. They seemed really happy, and I was like, oh, it's fake. It can't be real. But and I remember saying to Jamie, I think this course isn't right for me. Like, this isn't what I expected. And he's like, just stay to the end of the weekend, stay to the end of the 3 days, and if you still don't like it, don't worry, we'll give you money back. So, all right, fine. And he's like, but give it, a good go. Like, give it a chance. So I said, okay, fair enough. And so somewhere along like day 2, I can't remember what the speaker said, but what I heard was, my anger is a reflection of my thinking. It's not a reflection of the person that I'm angry at being an idiot, or the situation being wrong or bad. And that was like a huge epiphany, because for me, anger always looked like, if not wholly, a large part of it was down to external factors. Like, if that person had said something, then I wouldn't be angry. If this situation didn't occur, then I wouldn't be angry. Of course, it's got something to do with that situation. And this guy was saying the opposite, right? Or he was pointing to the opposite. And I kind of just thought, no, this doesn't align with like 10 years of personal development, 11 years of personal development. That doesn't align. But he was absolutely, really adamant. And he was saying that, that the angrier you get, kind of the more out of clarity you are, the more you're not seeing things clearly, right? In three principles language, they would say you've gone outside in, right? And so I started testing this in my mind. I went, God, what if that's true? And I went back to the real world, if you like, and I started just like my whole life just started changing, because I was living at home with my parents at the time, and my mom said something, and I got annoyed as I did, and I slammed the door in her face. And then all of a sudden it occurred to me, like, hold on a second, this isn't about what she said, which it really looked like it was. This can't be. If what that guy said is true, it can't be. So I went and apologized. And my relationship with my parents started to get better. At work, I'd get angry. I'd get an email from someone saying they can't do this or they can't do that. And I'd get annoyed, and I'd complain to my coworker. I'd go for a walk. I'd complain to my boss. I'd waste all this time, right? And so email comes in. I go, for fuck. And I didn't finish the sentence. And I realized, hold on. And my colleague went, what's going on? And I went, no, hold on a second. And I just was like, can this angry feeling be just my thinking and not the email? Like, hold on, is that what? And it just dissipated, and the anger just fell away. And I was just like, well, it is what it is. And I wrote a response, and I went, wow, I just saved an hour. And so I started being way more productive at work, right? And then I started saying, it's not just anger. And the speaker wasn't just talking about anger. Anger was just the first thing that I saw. It was the same thing with boredom, right? I used to get a feeling of boredom. And I'm like, well, this is telling me I'm in a boring situation, or, so I need to do something to alleviate that. Or again, at work, oh, this task is boring, so I'm going to avoid it because I don't want to feel even more bored. And so I just started, just smashing through my work. Within 2 months, I was so ahead of like where I was, which was just totally unheard of. And my boss just was like, what's got into you? Like, what is going on? And I wasn't a poor performer at work. It wasn't like I was really underperforming. I was a good performer, but this just took me to another level. And so my first glimpses into the three principles was that basically whatever I'm feeling has got nothing. And I know that's hard to believe. And it was hard to believe for me at first, but it's got nothing to do with other people or situations or circumstances. It can only come from our own thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't need to take my word for that. What I advise people is like, test that out for yourself. And that's what I do with my clients. And the implications of it, that's what's really powerful, right? Because the implications are what really changes people's lives.
Mm-hmm. So I kind of want to peel this back a bit more, because I think, like you said, it is hard to understand, right? If this is the first time that you're kind of hearing, right, my anger isn't caused by that person annoying me, it's caused by my think, like, it can be quite hard to really understand. So why then does it appear that if someone says something, it makes you angry? Someone pushes in front of you to get on the tube or in line at the shop, it makes you annoyed. To, you know, go on holiday makes me happy. Like, why do things appear this way around to us then?
Yeah, I mean, it does look that way. It looked that way to me, and this is when I started. And this is what I say: rather than, you might have some thoughts listening to this, going, "No, he's wrong," or "I don't believe that." That's fine. You're entitled to that. What I would say is just put them to the side for a second, if you're open to it, and let's just start exploring it. Because this is what I did. I was like, okay, Jamie and some other people are saying this stuff. Let me test it. I'll give everything a go, right? And if it's right, wow. And if it's wrong, I'll be able to poke some holes in it. And so I started looking at it, and there were a couple of different things. So someone pushes in front of me in a queue, and I get angry, for argument's sake. Okay, if it really is the person pushing in front, then we'd all feel anger. But if you got 100 people, there'd be a complete range of emotions. One person would not even like, okay, whatever, I guess they're in a, like, it's fine, go ahead, you obviously need to be in the queue, and be totally okay with it and make friends with that person. And the other end of the spectrum, someone would have literally murderous rage, and they would kill the person. Literally, there would be people at either end of the spectrum, maybe not 100, but if you got a large enough sample set, someone would kill another person for jumping the queue. And chances are your listeners are somewhere in the middle of that.
Yeah.
Right?
I'd hope so.
Yeah, so if it is the person, why is the range so wide? Why is it from it doesn't affect someone to it affects someone way worse than you? Right? And people go, well, that's just my personality. For me, if someone pushes in front of me, then I feel like that. And then I started exploring that, going, well, if that's true, then that should be true all the time. Right? And when you start exploring it, you'll start seeing certain situations where, and maybe it's anger, maybe it's boredom, maybe it's something else, but you don't get the exact same feeling or the intensity of the feeling the same. So one day, you're on a hot tube, right? And someone's cramming in the tube, and you're just like, oh, I want to punch them in the face. Like, do you know what? I've had a crap day. Just chill out, man. Like, seriously. And another day, it doesn't bother you that much. You might still be a little bit annoyed, but you might just like, oh, okay, whatever. Like, what you do, you live in London. This happens. Right? Why is that? There's got to be another variable at play for the intensity or the emotions to be different. Right? Same with going on holiday. I mean, I used to have this like, yeah, holidays, that'll make me feel better, that'll chill me out. Well, what would happen is I would talk about going on holiday, but then I get stressed trying to get everything done before going on holiday. Oh my God, I've got all this stuff to do. I'd avoid doing the work. I'd cram it all in the last minute, right? I'd work really late the day before to get it all done. Then I'd go on holiday, and now I'm like, how can I get the most out of the holiday? How can I get the most out of the holiday? Because I was so in my head. And then it's like, oh man, I've got to go back to work in 2 days. This holiday's nearly over. And I never truly, there were very brief moments of me actually enjoying the holiday. It was all coming from my thinking. And we see this, you might go on holiday with someone else who's just way in their head. I know people who are like, they've got to schedule every single second of a holiday. Like, we need to maximize the fun. We need to wake up at 6 o'clock and get to this place to see. And someone else might be like, whoa, just chill out. Let's go with the flow. Right. And so we see people who might be more in their heads, and we see people who are kind of more chilled out, and they have, and maybe you're all on the same holiday together, you'll have different experiences. So we start to see, without scratching too far, without going too deep, you start to see, well, hold on, okay, the role of my thinking, yeah, okay, most people can get there, like there's something here, right? And I never tell anyone, believe me, like blind faith or anything. I'm always about people exploring this for themselves. And that's what happened for me when I started exploring this. The changes in my life were just phenomenal. I mean, really unbelievable, especially for someone who'd been around personal development for 11 years. And not only had I been around it, I'd benefited, a lot. I was very, very different. And I wasn't looking for any more personal development. But the changes were huge. And even at that point, I was like, I don't really buy the 100% thing. I don't really buy that it's all my thinking. And if you're there, that's cool. You don't need to buy into what I'm saying. Just keep exploring it. What I found is, as I kept exploring it, it took me about a year or two, but eventually I just couldn't find any exceptions.
Yeah.
And that's when it got really fun. But I hope that gives people a little bit of a glimpse as to what we're talking about and how it can be helpful for them.
Yeah, and I think it's, I guess what we're saying here is that the event or the situation itself is neutral, but it's the way that we, I guess, interpret that through our own thinking that creates our feeling, which then makes it feel like anger or happiness or stress or whatever it may be. And I think one of the examples that I've used quite a lot, and one of the things that helped me realize this a lot, was going to football. Like, I'm a big Arsenal fan, so I'd go to matches and I'd be sat there with my dad or my friends, and the score would be, what, say Arsenal drew, it was 1-1, whatever. Walk out the stadium and like my dad and my friend would be like, "Oh, that was rubbish. Like, I can't believe we played so bad. Like, oh, I'm so pissed off," and this, that, and the other. And I'd be walking away going, "No, do you know what? It was all right. Like, we had a few chances. If it went this way or that way, it could have been different." And, I wasn't necessarily angry. I was just like, I could see, okay, well, it is what it is. I'm not, it hasn't made me angry. It hasn't made me upset. And I'd look at that and I'd sort of go, well, why is that the case? Why do I feel calm and this other person feels angry or upset or annoyed? Like, because we've just watched the same game. Like, the experience that we've had in the external world, the event, the situation, the outcome of the game was exactly the same for both of us. We haven't watched two different matches, pretty sure of that. But both of our experience walking away from the game was like entirely different. And that was the I guess the situation where I started to pick holes in it a lot, because that became really obvious to me. Because sometimes, like you said, if you're standing in line and someone pushes in front of you, it's like it's like a solo experience. But when you experience something, it could be a night out, it could be a holiday. I'm using football as the example, with other people, and everyone's experience and feelings differ. Then you're like, well, why is that? We've experienced the same thing. But then I guess on the flip side, people would say, well, that's just who I am, right? And that's something that I used to believe in my like early 20s when I was quite depressed. I just used to think, well, this is who I am. I'm negative. Like, everything's just a bit blah. Like, I'm not really bothered about much. And I just thought, that's just who I am. I just have to just deal with it. Like, it was almost like I was programmed that way, right? It was the kind of belief. So how would you go about, I guess, people who are in that situation and they believe like that's just the way I am, like I'm negative, or I'm this, or I'm a stress head, or I'm I'm always anxious, or whatever it is, like how would you point someone towards this understanding for themselves?
Well, I would just say explore it. What have you got to lose, right? I mean, I really start from that place of, if you want things to be different, then have a look at this. And the thing that really intrigued me, because I'd looked at lots of different techniques and ways to help people, and I was open to everything. But what really intrigued me was the results, right? So this work's been around since the kind of mid 70s. And it, they talk about being the best kept secret in psychology. Because there were very few, originally there were very few people doing this work, very few professionals doing this work. But the ones that were, I mean, the results they were getting were just phenomenal, right? So in the US, one of the psychologists who works from this understanding, Dr. George Pransky, and his wife, they did a lot of work with people on relationships. And typically relationship counseling, I think even today, it typically has about a 20% success rate, right? If you go to relationship counseling, marriage counseling, there's about a 20% chance you're going to stay together. And people say, well, the reason for that is, you can't do the work for people, and people that come to us, they're already troubled, and 20% is better than nothing, and the sooner you come in, the better. Well, that's fine. George and Linda, they had an 80% success rate. I mean, like 4 times as much. But not only that, most of the time, the 20% where the couples didn't stay together, they separated very, on friendly terms. It wasn't kind of acrimonious. So that was unusual. That was kind of not normal, right? There was another psychologist who's passed away now, and I think it was in the 90s, or was it 80s or 90s. He went into the worst housing project in America, which had the highest homicide rate in the US. I mean, literally the highest homicide rate. And over the course of a couple of years doing this work, and literally just pointing people to how their minds work. That's all he did. I mean, that's pretty much it. He took the homicide rate down to 0.
Wow.
Right. And there was a whole book written on it. I think there's a movie being made about that. The book is called Modelo. And he won kind of the Martin Luther King Peace Prize. He was on Good Morning America. But again, there weren't very many people doing this. But like, again, that's unusual. This was a place where the police wouldn't go. The housing project, it was kind of like there were 4 entrances in, and there were different drug gangs at each entrance. And so he changed their lives. There's another couple of, I guess, coaches who worked with corporations on a really high level, and that they got given the edict from the board or whatever, like, we need you to make an extra $100 million profit next year. And so they all got together and they came up with their best ideas, and they went, right, it's like 20 million that we can come up with, and we're not even sure we can guarantee the 20. And so they brought these guys in, and again, just pointing to how the mind works, and getting them to drop a lot of their misunderstandings. They identified projects that were like way over 100, like 170 or something. I don't remember the exact number. And they hit over 100 million in the next year, right, of profit, which was, they just couldn't believe that was possible. So, and I could go on. There's so many examples, personal examples. This work's gone into prisons. I forgot to mention that, where prisoners, their mental health and well-being got so well, they would tell the facilitators, can you teach the guards this? We're worried about them. They're really struggling.
Wow.
Like, again, that's very unusual, right? And so I was like intrigued, like something's going on. Like the results they're almost too good to be true. And the people who I met, who were my mentors originally, these people were in their 70s, and with their own relationships, they were just so like, you don't see relationships like that. They were so loving. They were like newlyweds, and they were in their 70s and been married for 40 years. The way they would interact with people, right, was very present, and you could feel their presence. Like, this person knows something about life, right? Like something's going on here. And I would feel immediate connection with them. And again, I've met some really great coaches and trainers and really, really clever people. And the people I met in the kind of three principles space were just there was just something very, very different. And so what I would say is, in the 70s, it was a bit of a gamble. But now, kind of like, nearly 50 years on, 45 years on, there's so many examples, and I'm an example of this too. And I see this with my clients all the time. I get to see time and time again, our personalities aren't fixed,
Hmm.
right? No matter what people tell you, I've seen real miracles occur, in all sorts of areas. Like I had a client. I mean, this is a bit of an unusual one. He was struggling with his wife because he said, "Oh, I've got this is an odd one," but he's like, "I have a low sex drive. My wife has a high sex drive. I think we're going to split up." And I'm like, "Oh, well, I'm not a sex coach. I don't know. I don't do that work." But again, just pointing them to how the mind works and helping him realize that he was really in his head when he did have sex with his wife, and he totally wasn't present, and he was holding on to all this thinking because it looked true and that's who he was and all the rest of it. He started to let that go, and it changed them. And I mean, literally years later, it's 5 years later, I spoke to him recently. We're not coaching anymore, but I spoke to him recently. I'm like, has that been a permanent shift? He went, yeah, it's permanently changed us.
Wow.
Right. So and I could spend the rest of this podcast just giving you examples, but I hope that just gives enough for people to really think, okay, maybe there's something here. And I would just say go and explore that for yourself.
Yeah, I think 100%. I think like we touched on earlier, right? I think it's something that's very hard to understand because I guess we apply too much thought to it. We're trying to like, you know, uh, really shine a microscope on it, and try and understand. But it's like actually just watch how it plays out in your own life and experience it and see for yourself how true or not it is. Because I think that's where I definitely started to see it playing out. Like, you can read the books, you can watch the videos, you can hear this conversation, and you can be like, okay, cool. Like these guys are saying that our thoughts create our feelings, and that determines outcomes, and etc. etc. But it's like take it on board, I guess, and they said test it, right? So what is it about it that you would say creates such great outcomes for people? Why is it so different to, you know, CBT therapy or, other kind of personal growth, 5 steps to
Mm.
happiness or, all that sort of stuff? What makes this so different in your experience in terms of the transformation and the shifts that it creates for your clients and other people that you've seen in this world?
Well, the principles goes beyond the cognitive, right? And that's not just me saying it. Like a bunch of my mentors are clinical psychologists. They're far smarter than I am, and they were trained in a lot of these other approaches. um, and they drop them because the principles is more effective because it works at a different level, right? So this isn't at the level of changing your thinking. I'm not trying to help you install new beliefs or different beliefs. This is kind of going much deeper into your kind of internal wiring, if you like, and saying, hey, the fundamental basis of how you're viewing reality, that's not how it works, right? And there are implications of that. And so if I may give a tiny plug,
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a book, or which I published a couple of years ago. And when I was writing the book, I was like, what am I going to write about? There are other great books on the three principles. That does the world need my book? And I was like, I'm going to just make my book filled with implications,
Mm-hmm.
stories of how this is, like how it plays out. And one of the chapters is around forgiveness. And so we've heard about forgiveness, maybe from a psychological point of view, maybe from a spiritual point of view. But one of the things my mentor helped me see from a three principles perspective is forgiveness is unnecessary, right?
Mm.
Which is quite a bold statement. But if you see, because he helped me see this, he was like, Ankush, if you're feeling your thinking moment to moment, then you'll see there isn't anything to forgive. You only need to forgive someone if they've done something to hurt you, right? But if that, now I'm not talking about kind of, there might not be things that people have done that are objectively wrong, sure, but this kind of goes deeper than that, because to me it's like true forgiveness. Because a lot of people, I'll just talk about myself, I used to forgive people from a place of, you're wrong, I'm right, but I'm coming from this higher place and I forgive you for doing wrong to me. And that's not really forgiveness. You're still holding on to something. And so this is where this is different, where it's like, no, go a little bit deeper and realize what was going on there. So this person stole money from me, right? Oh, I need to forgive them. Versus, well, they stole money from you. That's a situation. You might not want it to occur again because there's practical implications of that. But on the level of your feelings, how you feel about it's got nothing to do with them taking the money from you. And you can then take practical steps to protect yourself. I'm not saying don't do that, of course, but it's on the level of feelings. There's nothing to forgive, right? Nothing at all. And that is different. That is not the same as other approaches, right? And to me, this isn't about making us victims or let people walk all over us. In fact, it's the opposite. To me, this is the most empowering thing, because if we just take forgiveness as an example, I had a lot of judgment against people, and I could tell you the stories, and I would say most people on this podcast would agree that these people had done wrong, right? But that judgment was really, it was corrosive to my soul. It was really not great for my own well-being or mental health. And when I, did a bit of work on that and looked at it from a three principles perspective, like, what if that is all neutral? Like, and it took a bit of time. Like, my ego wanted to go, no, what they did was wrong. That isn't right. And I kind of stayed with it and looked at it, and I was like, no, it can't. It isn't an exception. It's not an exception. And when I did, it was like the biggest weight got lifted off of me, right? Now, I don't want to go and hang out with those people. I don't want to go and be friends with them. I don't necessarily want them in my life. Not because I'm judging them. It just doesn't make practical sense, right? But the weight got lifted off of me. And, sometimes people say, well, you're saying, oh, you're feeling, you're thinking, what about domestic violence situations? Like, people will go to extremes. And I'll say, well, from what I see, absolutely, if someone's in physical danger or trouble, like, yeah, remove yourself from that. And I think the reason why often people don't is because of their thinking, right? And I wasn't in a violent situation, but I had a relationship many years ago that really I should have walked away from. But because of my thinking and thinking my happiness depended on a relationship with women, I stayed in that relationship, which really, was like took a hammer to my self-esteem at the time. And so I believe if everyone were to understand what we're pointing to, you would leave before it, at the first sign of something like that. Because what this stuff does, what this understanding does, is it raises our self-esteem. Like, it's raised my self-esteem, and it's really put me in a position of massive internal power, because I take ownership for my life, right? Whereas before, I was a victim. I was a victim of bullies. I was a victim of, people that have wronged me or my family. I was a victim of, the system. I was a victim of racism. I was a victim of all sorts of stuff. And yeah, great. I was a great victim. It didn't help me. And also knowing that it didn't help me wasn't helpful. But when I looked at it from a principles perspective, where it was like, no, this isn't about changing a belief. It's like, well, what's true? It, like, I'll pick something again that's very topical and maybe very I don't know what the word is, controversial. And I'm fine for people to have a different opinion about this. This is just my opinion. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything, but racism was a massive thing for me. Like, I had a massive blind spot around it. I was like, I just saw red, I was very passionate about, eliminating racism. But again, I can say this now with hindsight, I had a chip in my shoulder. And when I saw things from a three principles perspective, it was like, right, no one can make, if I have that thinking about racism being bad, then it's really easy for a racist to make me feel bad. I'm giving them all this power, right? You just say a certain word and now you're going to upset me. Wow, I'm giving you all this power to upset me. I'm doing that. Whereas if I can see words are just neutral, and again, I'm not expecting anyone else to believe this, or, everyone's got to follow what makes sense for them. But this is what occurred for me. It was like, I'm reclaiming my power because now I'm taking the power away from racists to upset me. And then what happened was I started to really feel compassion for people, because I started to go deeper than that and see, well, why are they being that way? Oh, they're insecure. Like you wouldn't be mean to someone else because of the color of their skin if you were really happy and secure in yourself as a person. And so it was like a massive game changer. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to go and start walking around in the middle of some hooligans and get my head kicked in, right? It's not a good
Yeah.
idea. I have that practical common sense, but in terms of my own turmoil around it, I don't let that affect me. And I think that makes me more able to address people and be a positive force, right? For kind of progressing, people moving forward, because I don't have that chip on my shoulder, because I am not getting offended. I'm not going to give anyone the ability to offend me. They can't. And that makes me really powerful.
Yeah, and I what I really hear from that is that just because you respond in a different way, by seeing what's going on with your own thinking, doesn't mean that the racism, or we're using racism in this case, but the situation isn't there, doesn't mean you're ignoring it. It just means your response to it in terms of how you've interpreted it yourself becomes different. And like you said, you're not going to go and see a bunch of hooligans and go and stand in the middle of them because it's there, but you're going to have a different feeling towards it. And like you said, that one was compassion or whatever. Is that about right? Because I feel like that's what I think a lot of people might take from this in their own way, maybe, or they might see as like, well, you're just ignoring racism.
Right. And like, I'm also very pragmatic, and I like things being effective. I love that word. What's effective? And again, this is before I came across this understanding. When you look out in the world of racism, whatever, like, to me, one person who moved things forward massively, like I'm a huge fan of his, was Nelson Mandela, right? And there were some atrocious things that happened to people during apartheid in South Africa and to black people. And when he became, the kind of head of state, well, I don't know if he was president or whatever of South Africa, they didn't go around, or he certainly didn't encourage people to go and take revenge, right? He's like, we need to heal. And so they would have, and again, I don't know fully the history, so this is just what I've heard, but they had kind of these areas where, let's say a white soldier or something, or had gone in and killed some black kid, and the mother would be there, and they just talked it out. And they said, why did you kill my kid? And they healed from that. It wasn't like, right, you kill my kid, so I'm going to kill you, because that would have been a ton of bloodshed and nothing would have moved forward, right? But instead, they healed like, that takes an extraordinary amount of compassion to do that, right? It, like, that to me was like, I was just in awe of that, and I was like, I don't think I could have done, like, when I first heard about that, I was like, I don't think I could have done that. But they moved forward, right? And I'm not saying South Africa's perfect, but like, from where it was to, like, that is incredible to me. And I think that's also more effective, right? Whereas, I think if they'd gone in and started, like, just killing white people for the sake of it, I don't think that would have really change the opinions of anyone. That wouldn't have healed the country. That wouldn't have moved people forward, right? And again, I'm not advocating certain behaviors or not certain behaviors. I'm just saying when we look at things from this perspective, it gives us more power and makes us more effective in the way we deal with people. Now, dealing with some people might mean, right, taking a tough stance. I'm not against that per se. But what I am saying is that if we only look at things from what's called an outside-in perspective, like we need to deal with racism because racism upsets people,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's not, to me, it's not the most effective way. And I'll just say it. Look, we've been trying to deal with it for a long time in things like football, and look what happened recently.
Yeah.
Right. So what we're doing right now isn't effective. It's not working. And again, this might be very controversial. I wasn't planning on talking about this, but this is what just came out.
Yeah.
It's like, again, for me on a personal level, in areas like forgiveness, in areas like racism, in areas like stress and productivity, understanding how the mind works has really improved my mental health. It's given me my power back. And that's not to say I don't have low moments.
Mm-hmm.
There are moments where I do get stressed, I do get upset, I do feel low. I still have challenges, but with this understanding, it really helps me see eventually that that's just coming from my own thinking, and that helps me deal with it more effectively. And if I hadn't known that, and maybe this is a very strong thing to say, I don't know if I would be alive today. Really, I don't know if I would have just been another statistic of male suicide, because there were some really low moments in my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And so, and I've had clients tell me, I didn't even know they were depressed. I've had clients come to me for coaching and they've told me a year or two later, Ankush, you saved my life. And I'm like, what? We never talked about, walking you off a ledge or anything. And they went, yeah, but I had a lot of that thinking in the back of my head. And if I hadn't seen this, all the techniques and everything else, they weren't helping. And I would have carried on going down that path.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And, again, that totally resonates with my own journey. And I think I just want to touch a little bit on what we were just talking about with the racism. I think what's really powerful about that is that you can replace the word racism for bullying, for trauma, for anxiety, for depression. And again, it takes it all the way back to ourselves and our understanding, and how compassion through not placing judgment and stuff plays its part in terms of healing. And I think that's what's really powerful, is that this understanding that we're talking about, the principles, can be applied to anything across the board. And I think that hopefully people can see that through this conversation. And I think actually it's a really great point to jump into some of the questions that we've got that have come into us from the audience, because a lot of those kind of relate to what we've just been talking about, not necessarily racism, but just stuff in that space. So there's a question from Rachel asking, when you wake up with negative thoughts, how do you overcome them without them throwing you off for the day?
It's a great question, Rachel. And again, if I was in a conversation with you, I would say, why do you need to overcome them? Right? There's a belief that I had that when I have negative thoughts, I need to do something to overcome them, to change them, to stop them. And what the three principles helped me see was, I don't need to do anything. And it was really a blind spot for me that I was doing a lot, and I was giving those negative thoughts that I would have energy. I was keeping them going like a merry-go-round. I was kept pushing it, like, well, what about if this happens? What if that happens? And what about this? And what about that? And as children have negative thoughts. They get upset. They have a tantrum. They don't do anything with it. They don't have a system or a process. And then they're fine. And what a lot of people, I find, realize when they look into this work is that kind of like unconsciously, they're putting a lot of energy in keeping their negative thoughts alive. So this isn't about doing something different. This is about stopping doing
Mhm.
the kind of the energetic work that is keeping them going all day. Like you trying to stop or overcome your negative thinking is ironically what's keeping it alive.
Yeah, I love that. It's giving the thoughts more power over you, isn't it? It's like what you were saying before about you're reclaiming the power for yourself when you aren't willing to let something dictate how you feel, or at least appear that way. And yeah, you're giving the power back to yourself rather than giving the power to your thinking and those thoughts. Because, like you said, I always explain it like we get caught in like a mental like washing machine. It's like we we end up just going round and round and round and round, and we're not actually. Although it seems like we're doing something, we're not actually letting it just settle and we're not letting the machine finish its work. We're like continuing the cycle. Um, so then we've got another question from Maddie, which is actually, I guess, fairly similar. But Maddie has asked, I guess this is a little bit more practical in a way. She's asked us, the slightest thing can happen at work on a Friday, and then I'm anxious and thinking about it all weekend, worrying that I'm going to get sacked or something on Monday. What can I do?
Yeah, it is a similar thing. If you really want to doing, my suggestion would be start start looking into some of this work, right? So even at the back of my book, I kind of had a further reading list. And when I came across this work in 2012, there wasn't really a lot of stuff available. And now there's just so much content, there's so many resources. I mean, when I speak to people, I'm saying, look, if you don't want to hire me, that's fine. Um, Here's 6 books, right, that are really great. Go and read them. Take a year, go and read these books. And if you read them slowly and mindfully and with an open mind, right, um, it can't not change your life, right? It can't not change you. So as I said to kind of Rachel's question, you're keeping that thinking alive, and you might not know how to stop doing that, and that's okay. But if you keep looking at the resources, keep looking at that, what I find is insights tend to pop up. Like there's something in you that recognizes the truth of this work, and you'll start to drop some of your misunderstandings. You'll start to drop some of your thinking that doesn't look like thinking, right? Like there might be something in you which is, oh, it's really important I don't get sacked. That's
Hmm.
also just a thought, right? And I know, like, what? No, it is. It's just a thought. You don't need a job. It's not in this country. You'll survive. You won't necessarily be homeless. So um, you start to drop things as you keep looking in this direction and you keep exploring this, and you'll be surprised at how quickly that can change your life.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think as well, just even as you were saying that, like I'd say to Maddie, like, how many times have you gone in on a Monday and got the sack? But I mean, by the sounds of it, not a lot, because if it's a continuing thing that you worry about, to me, it sounds like you still have the job that you're worried about. You're going to get sacked every Monday. So it goes to show that although the thinking can appear quite real to you, it's not necessarily true. And if you allow yourself, like Ankush said, to step away from that and drop it, then, that those, okay, you might still have the thought, but the feelings might not necessarily follow. Um, and then there's one final question, which I think again does tie in quite nicely from Jenny, and she's asked, "How can I be more present?" The golden question.
Yeah, no, that's a great question again. And to me, presence again isn't about doing something. This is where the 3 principles differs in its approach, right? This work it's been described as subtractive psychology.
Mm.
So most psychology is additive. It's like do this technique, do this, do that. Whereas this is more subtractive. This is about taking away. So you are born present, like children are born really present. What moves us away from that presence is our head is just like filled with thinking, right? And beliefs and ideas and concepts and stories and opinions, right? And so the way we go back to presence is by kind of removing those. So how do you remove them? That's the right. Again, there's no process. It's by kind of shining a light on stuff like we've done, like I did on racism or forgiveness. And as I've shone a light on those beliefs or areas, I've started seeing how false they are. And once you see it's false, you can't keep thinking it. It's like, well, it doesn't make sense, right? And so it falls away, and then something else falls away and falls away. And I've kind of done that through reading. I've done that through listening. I've done that through one-to-one conversations with my mentors, and still do. And as I keep doing that, I end up being more present. Every time a thought or a belief falls away because I've kind of shone the light of truth on it, and it doesn't kind of hold up. It dissipates. It falls away, and what I'm left with is a quieter mind. And when I'm left with a quieter mind, I'm more present.
I love that. I love that so much because, you know, this podcast is called In the Moment. I've got the sign behind me that says live in the moment. And, you know, it's not so much like you said about doing things. You know, people will say, oh, meditate more, or, you know, whatever, go for walks more, or whatever it is, spend less time on your phone, all that sort of stuff. But all it's doing is pointing you back to exactly what you've just said, right? It's just allowing the thinking to drop away. And when that drops away, everything else drops away with it, the stories, the judgments, the concepts. And one thing that I've heard you say before, and I just want to touch on before we sign out, is this idea of leaving room for I don't understand this. Do you mind explaining a little bit about what that means and how that kind of looks?
So I'm going to guess that what you're asking is, and I'll come back to something I said before or touched on, was when I was learning other stuff in the personal development world, it was like, to really benefit from that work, I needed to really, really, really get it. Like I needed to get it strong. If I didn't understand it, the benefits were very little. The three principles is exactly the opposite. I didn't need to understand what they were. I couldn't even explain them for years. I couldn't really kind of define them for a long time. And yet the impact on me was great. So if even if most of what I've said has kind of gone over your head or you don't get it, that's totally okay. If something's calling to you, just kind of pull on that string, pull on that thread and follow that. And, you know, I talk about it like when I first came across this, I was like, oh, this is really simple. Like I kind of get it like 90%. And then a year later, I was like, maybe it's about 50. And then a year after that, it was like, maybe it's about 20. And then kind of like a year after that, it's like, no, maybe it's 1%. And now it's like, I don't know anything. For all practical purposes, I want to keep a completely open mind and act as if I don't know really what this is, because that helps me see more. Because this is all about uncovering things that are in the shadows, that are in our blind spots, thinking that we don't realize is thinking. It just looks like facts to us. So I just want to be wide open to keep seeing more. And that seems to be really helpful.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's like you said, it's just, I guess it's finding comfort, isn't it, in not knowing that, and that leaves space for everything else to be open. And I think that's one of the things that's really helped me just in my life, not just business or, you know, relationships, just in life in general across the board. It's like leave space to not know and be comfortable with that, and then you kind of just allow things to unfold. And like you said, and if there's something that sparks your curiosity, like pull on that a little bit and follow it and see. So if anyone has any kind of questions, or they want to understand more, or they want to get in touch with you, or they want to find out more about your work, the principles, where can they get hold of you?
The best place is my website. It's kind of a portal for everything else. So that's Ankush Jain, ANKUSHJAIN.co.uk. I couldn't get .com, so it's .co.uk.
Been there.
And then you get links to everything. Like I'm on Facebook, I'm on a little bit on Instagram. I've got like 4 different YouTube channels. I've got a book out. There's loads of content out there of me, but that's probably a good place to start.
Yeah, and I'd highly recommend to deep dive a little bit on the website, check out lots of the videos, go and get Ankush's book, Sweet Sharing, and just build that picture up for yourself. Like you said, drop the drop the understandings for yourself around all of this stuff. So Ankush, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a really interesting conversation. I hope a lot of people have taken a lot from it, or it's at least sparked them to go and follow up on some of this conversation for themselves.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. It's been great having you on the show. I'm normally used to saying that. It's been great being on the show.
Pleasure.